again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. Those of you who have encountered ghosts or the supernatural, what was your experience like? What happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I and my friend went into an abandoned mental hospital late one night in the summer to check it out. It was closed up, so we had to kind of break in. We jumped through the window and were met with an empty room. There was also a crow that kept flying around that kind of scared us. We walked around a bit and found out that the front door was wide open. To the left of that door was a stairway to the basement. I told my friend to come down. He refused. Keep in mind, it was really dark, so I used my mobile flashlight while taking a video. Walking down, there was a right turn and stairways going further down. I remember I wanted to turn around, but something told me to keep going. At the bottom, there was a small room and a hallway leading to another room. While I was filming, I heard my friend call out to me, so I hurried upstairs before we left. We watched the video later. My heart jumped a bit when I saw something that looked like a ghost jump in front of me while I was in the basement. I swore I didn't see or feel anything when I was down there, but apparently something was. I couldn't sleep that night because I was so scared. I was certain that a ghost and a crow had followed me home and were screaming outside my window. It's been many years now, but our house was on the same property as my grandfather. Before he went into the veterans' home, he would always sit outside in his rocking chair and tap the porch with his cane. Fast forward a couple of years, he got really sick and ended up passing away. That same night, we wondered if he went peacefully. It was scary at the time because we were so young, but we heard his cane tapping, so we went outside and looked across. His chair was rocking, and you could hear the cane tapping. I guess he came home. Also, after my grandfather had died, the magnolia tree stopped blooming. When my grandfather died, he must have joined my grandmother because that tree ended up blooming flowers that spring. When I was a kid, about 6 or 7 years old, my mom would sometimes sit on my bed until I fell asleep. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sensation of hair brushing against my face. Despite my exhaustion, I sensed something was strange about the situation. I asked, "Mom, is that you?" And suddenly felt something lean down to my ear and whisper, "Mommy loves you," in a voice that was definitely not my mother's. After jumping out of bed, I ran into my parents' room and found them sleeping. My mom walked me back to my room and showed me that there was nothing there, but I was still completely terrified. I eventually fell asleep, but it was not easy. This is my cousin's story, but we both lived in the same house. In our 1800s house, we had never experienced anything before, but this changed that. My cousin was maybe 12, and he was running into the front living room. When he walked in, he saw a boy drenched in water looking out the window. He looked at him for a bit, and then his mom called for him, so Rob turned around to yell back. However, the boy had vanished by the time he turned back. We also attended a seminar at school where they were advised to exercise caution when swimming in a particularly strong but popular river. They had discussed the case of a child who had drowned in the same river. During it, I got a horrible bloody nose out of nowhere. Years later, we discovered that a boy had drowned in a river, and his family had lived in our house before us, holding his wake in the front living room. When I was in college, I went to visit a friend who lived in a haunted dorm at another university. The original family's autistic son supposedly haunted the converted mansion that housed her dorm. The story goes that he lived his life locked in the attic under the care of a nurse. One day, the nurse drowned him in the bathroom and hung herself. There were sightings of him throughout the years, and he was nicknamed Blue Boy. Well, once she told me that story, I just had to be sure the attic for myself. She said there was a stairway we could take to go up there, but the door to enter was always locked. Fortunately, it wasn't locked this night. We entered the attic and saw that that's where the building's power grid was, right in the first room. I insisted we explore the rest of the floor. We walked down a long hallway and turned a corner into a bedroom. The bedroom was noticeably colder than the hall and other rooms, and also smelled like sulfur. Otherwise, observing the view from the window, I noticed a small handprint in the dust-caked glass. Very small. I pointed this out to my friend, and when she approached to examine my discovery, we both heard running down the hall and a door slam. Thinking we had been caught, we looked around the floor and didn't see anyone, and all the doors were open even though we both heard that slamming sound. She and I had a wonderful time the rest of the night, laughing, playing some music, and telling stories. It was very light-hearted, and we almost forgot about Blue Boy. "I'm going to set you up in the wicker room tonight," she said with a wink. "It's also believed to possess a haunting presence." As I lay in that room, full of antique wicker furniture, trying to fall asleep, I heard the top key of the piano being hit over and over again to no particular rhythm. Then the running started. I was unable to fall asleep due to the repeated sounds of someone running up and down the stairs, striking the banister as they passed. This was also during a rainstorm, so it was a very loud night, to say the least. I heard one of her classmates come home, and all the sounds stopped for a while. Then, presumably, when this other person fell asleep in their bed, it all started up again. In summary, the piano was broken, and it hadn't rained that night. It was like this ghost was punishing me with a cacophony of sound that distributed my sleep because I had the audacity to disturb its attic. For the next 6 months, I suffered from night terrors, wherein a woman held me down, trying to suffocate me while whispering harshly in my ear. I'm not sure if this was supernatural, but my dog died while I was in school out of state last September. He was my favorite dog ever, and I loved him unconditionally. I couldn't be there when they put him down, obviously, and it was upsetting. But I had school stuff to worry about, so I didn't think about it too much. I wasn't actively suppressing it either. I cried for a bit the day of, and did my best to move forward. About a week later, when I went to sleep, I had the most vivid dream I've ever had in my entire life. I still remember almost all of the details of it, and I usually forget 90% of my dreams. In my dream, I was at home, playing around on the computer, when my mother summoned me downstairs. I went downstairs, and there was my dog right there, wagging his tail. I immediately ran up to him and embraced him. In the dream, I knew he was dead, and I asked my mom, "Why is he here?" She said he wanted to say goodbye. So I hugged him and pet him for hours. I smelled his breath, and it was just as awful as it always was. I asked if this was real, and she said yes. Then my mom said something that to this day I remember and use whenever I miss him. She said, "In the middle of the night, when you're lonely and you miss him, call out to him, and he'll come to you." I held him for what felt like hours, and then I woke up crying my eyes out. Later that day, my boyfriend came down and held me for hours while I continued to cry. I have the best boyfriend in the world. And after that, it felt like I had truly moved on. What's intriguing is that it was my mother who told me this stuff in my dream, and she's always considered herself a vessel to the spirit world, so to speak. She has had about 1 million ghost encounters in her life, many of them involving dead pets she used to have. I was never entirely certain whether or not I believed her, but I now sort of do. So that's what happened. I'm an avid stargazer, which is hard to be when you live in the middle of a dense Japanese city. Every night I have a smoke and a single beer on my 12th story apartment balcony and watch the sky for a good 20 or 30 minutes. Last year, around 2 a.m., I was out and saw 2 strange lights. The lights were yellow and bright, resembling 2 distant helicopters' spotlights aimed directly at me. They were moving north at a pretty slow speed, and then suddenly picked up speed. This sudden increase in speed was significant. I never witnessed a plane or helicopter carrying so much weight. They went from a local market arcade straight over the main city station in seconds. I checked the distance later, and even with a really conservative estimate, those lights traveled 4 to 6 kilometers in 2 to 5 seconds. I know that people aren't very good at remembering duration of time, so 5 seconds is me giving it a bit of padding. It felt like 2 at the most, though. That put these objects' speed at somewhere past the fastest plane speed ever recorded, 35,000 kilometers per second, roughly 0.9 kilometer a second. I'm one of the last individuals to think UFO, but I am still unable to determine what I observed. I'm not aware of any JGSDFs or US bases anywhere nearby. Of course, there's always the chance that I imagined it. I almost take comfort in thinking that I didn't see anything that night, because I've always been hypercritical of UFO experts. I've researched possible explanations, but haven't found anything satisfying. Ball lightning is a possibility, but it was a clear night, and there was no lightning activity anywhere close to that day. I may have imagined it, of course. That's an explanation that no observer likes to hear. If I were reading the story as someone else, I would immediately discount it. It was 2 a.m., and he was drunk, but at the time, I was on an adjusted sleep schedule, up all night, asleep all day, and it was basically my lunchtime. I also wouldn't classify myself as drunk, as I was still halfway through my daily beer when it happened. It's possible that a couple of small meteors hit the atmosphere hard, but collided? They may have collided with an object that abruptly and violently knocked them off the course. If their entry had been facing me at a very slight angle, it would have explained the slow movement and sudden acceleration. But the brightness should have increased dramatically once they crossed the sitcom. But it doesn't feel like an answer. It feels like I'm clawing for a comfortable solution. I don't know what it was, but I was about 7 or 8, learning and leaning against a railing on the ground floor. Besides, it was a drop to the basement from the first floor. I was talking to my twin brother and a friend. I don't know what happened, but I lost my balance. As I did, everything occurred in slow motion, and I felt as though I were outside of my body. I was unable to articulate the phenomenon, but it occurred soothing, and I was looking at myself and what was happening to me. I saw a little girl in white floating from where the basement was, and she grabbed my ankles. I then awoke in my bed, I lived on the 4th floor, and there were no elevators. My mom and twin brother informed me that I had fallen into the basement from the ground floor, but I managed to get up and start all the way up the stairs to my bed before going to sleep. Don't remember it from when I was that young, but I still remember that even clearly almost 2 decades earlier. I started demanding as soon as I fell. It was a one-time thing. It never occurred again. A few. When I was a small child, I would talk to Paul in my upstairs bedroom in an old family house. I don't really remember Paul, but originally he'd help me climb over the baby gate and get me down the stairs so I could go sleep in another room. I'd get up really early and walk and talk with them. Overall, I had a good feeling about Paul, but some years later, I'd get weird dreams about a secret room from the closet. Family later explained that they had seen balls of light dancing in that room, and there is in fact a crawl space in the closet that is about a person wide and leads through the sliding around to the other room upstairs. I chalk it up to imagination, mostly with a touch of sleepwalking. My parents have been separated for a long time, so in the main home I'd be in, I would occasionally get weird feelings near the one end of the building or my brother's room. I once glanced over and saw a dark brown, fuzzy, round object with a single leg protruding out of many doorways. Then it went away. Not sure what to think of that one. It was a garbage mobile home, but I still don't like any animal had gotten briefly. It's like merely a figment of imagination. Other families moved into the house where I'm now. We'd get Hector's mail, previous deceased owner, and started finding weird construction he added and some bullet holes. While patching the house up, we were to feel a presence, and things would move on their own. Stuff falling off the walls, the dogs staring and growling at nothing. We attributed this phenomenon to Hector. Supposedly, I said I saw him downstairs once. I just think the house may have been built in a nearby shoddy manner and is falling apart, especially where so many boards got moved during the few days of the minus 40-degree weather a couple of years ago. This year, it also is apparent that there are AMTs living in the walls and under the Bluetooth. I wouldn't say, and I would be happy to have Hector as a roommate any day over these little buggers.
First story. It was in the middle of the school year and I started seeing a figure in the corner of my eye. It was a female wearing a silk nightgown which was kind of torn and dirty. She had bruises and wounds on her arms and legs, but when I looked directly in her direction, she would be gone. I would start seeing her at 3 p.m. every day, same time, teacher, subject, every day. The first few days I was scared that I was going crazy. Several days later I was just annoyed, and during the last days I just tried hard to ignore it. Then one day we were having our lesson as usual. Our teacher gave us a quiz, and then she sat down. A few moments later she stood up and pointed at the same corner where I was seeing this figure or apparition, and she asked the whole class if we were seeing something. As soon as she said that, the entire class raised our hands, and we started describing what we were seeing. And it turned out that all of us had been seeing the same thing for 2 weeks, but we all thought it was just all in our heads. After this, we never saw it anymore. Second story. I was in 6th grade when this happened. I and my classmates saw our math teacher. We even tried talking to her, but she didn't respond. Then later after break time, we discovered that she was on leave that day. I and all 20 of my classmates who witnessed the same event were obviously shocked. We were shocked and scared. The next day, our teacher confronted us. She even became angry and accused us of fabricating the incident. However, we swore that we had seen her. The third story began when I was visiting some relatives in the countryside after dinner. The place was rural and dark, so I decided to follow my sister into this very dark room. As soon as I approached the door's threshold, I stopped and stared into the darkness. I immediately felt dread radiating out of that room. I stood there for a moment and decided to go to our guest room upstairs instead. When I opened the guest room's door, I saw my sister there. I asked her how she got there so fast. When she entered the dark room, she claimed that she had only been in our guest room, leaving me perplexed. However, moments later, our 12-year-old niece entered our room and claimed to have seen my sister. Our niece claimed to have seen my sister enter the dark room, which led me to believe that it was a doppelganger. Again, we talked about this last week, and the last time we discussed the topic about how I've never experienced anything like this. I wonder if you go in looking for something specifically, that you're kind of putting yourself in that mind space to see something maybe that isn't there. I don't know. Again, I like listening to the stories, but still yet to see anything. Not that I need to, myself. Growing up, I lived down the street from a home that had been vacant for a couple of years. On his way to work one morning, a tree fell and hit his car, decapitating the owner. The family moved out shortly after that. One summer day, 5 of us neighborhood kids were bored and looking for something to do, so we decided to hold a séance in that house. We let ourselves in and were surprised to discover that the house was still furnished. We made our way to the darkened basement and lit a candle that we had brought with us. In one corner of the dimly lit room, we noticed a piano. We sat at a table and pulled out a Ouija board. Whoa. My friends were excited and ready to start, but I was nervous because several weeks earlier, I stayed overnight at a friend's house across from that vacant one and encountered the family ghost in the middle of the morning. The next morning, I received assurances that Mrs. Donovan was harmless, yet it was my initial encounter that didn't prepare me for what happened next. I can't remember who we were trying to contact, but we placed our fingers on the planchette and used the letters on the board to form a question. While we waited for an answer, we nervously glanced around the room and then heard a gasp. Our eyes darted quickly toward the sound, and there under the piano was a young boy about 5 years old, crouching as if he were preparing to lunge. One look at his face, and we all jumped up and ran toward the basement stairs. Being the smallest one of the 5 of us, I brought up the rear, and as I did, we heard this boy laugh, but not in a good way. I felt something hit me in the back, but I didn't stop to look at what it was. When we reached the top of the stairs, we bolted out of that house, too afraid to look behind us. Once we reached the safety of the street, we laughed while we tried to catch our breath and absorb what had just happened. I told them that I felt something, and one of my friends turned me around, and that's when their eyes became large and disbelieving. That boy threw the candle at me. There was candle wax on the back of my shirt. I've had 2 encounters with ghosts. The first one happened on the farm I lived on with my family. The house was over 100 years old. The barn was maybe about 60 years old. The upstairs housed the hay, straw, and feed. The animals lived downstairs. There was a main door, which we used, and several exits that the animals used. Over the main door was a boarded-up hole. A staircase once stood there, but it had since relocated. We had a water pump in the barn located to the far right of the main door and against the wall. I always felt somewhat spooked when closing the barn in the evening. One evening, as I was getting water from the pump for the animals, I looked over to the main door. There was a pair of black Wellington gumboots coming down the stairs. There was no need for concern. Gumboots were a common sight on the farm. Then my mind kicked in. Where the gumboots were coming down, there were no stairs, Whoever was in those gumboots was not my family. I hastily turned off the water and left the barn by the back door. My mother gave me a lecture about not finishing my chores. My dad had done them. Years later, I found out that not only had I seen the boots, but my mother and my brother had also seen them. My second encounter happened in Florida. A friend of the family resided on the Gulf Coast in an old house situated on a small island. We had come to visit, and I had gotten a terrible sunburn. My mom was putting aloe vera gel on it to help with the pain. Normally, I slept on the screened-in deck, but due to my unwell state, they offered me a bedroom on the second floor. At some point in the night, my mother came in and put more aloe gel on me. I vaguely remember thinking to myself, how can she be standing there? The bed is against the wall, and the ceiling is right there. I drifted back off to sleep. In the morning, I thanked my mom for nursing me in the night. All conversation between my parents and our host stopped. I didn't go into your room last night. Our host said, you met the ghost. She must have realized you were not feeling well and was looking after you. There was a rumor that a woman once resided in the house, crafting herbal medicine and salves for local population. The spirit in that room would normally scare people out of it. Our host seemed to think the ghost took pity on me and looked after me instead. What's more interesting is that the areas where I felt my mother or ghost apply gel or salve healed faster than other burnt parts of my body. I stayed at the Renaissance Vinoy in St. Petersburg, Florida 4 years ago, working one of the college football bowl games as hospitality for Eastern Carolina University alumni. The individual in question has been featured on the Travel Channel for unusual events and has a reputation for experiencing a significant amount of paranormal activity. Upon checking in, the front desk associate informed us that we were staying in the room where all the activity takes place. Due to my work commitments and the hotel's full capacity, there were no alternative room options available. The first night I wake up in a cold sweat, and I'm talking wide awake. I have an overwhelming feeling that someone is watching me. It takes me a while to fall back asleep, but I brush it off as being paranoid. The next night was the definitive moment. There's a back patio outside one of their meeting areas that looks up at the windows on the upper floors. My 1 floor above room was the only one with lights on and blinds open. I distinctly remember turning out the lights and closing the blinds before leaving. I was sitting out back having a cigarette while calling my mom. It was around Christmas Eve, and for the first time, I couldn't be with my family. I hadn't yet told her about my experience the previous night or the alleged haunting of the property. Abruptly, she starts yelling into the phone, inquiring about my well-being and the mystery surrounding the situation. I'm staring up at the open window as this is happening, and as I blink, there's a shadowy silhouette of a man standing in the window staring directly at me. I'm watching, kind of frozen, but replying, Mom, what are you talking about? What's going on? But she can't hear me. This seems to go on for a full minute or so, though likely much shorter. When I blink once more, the silhouette vanishes, allowing her to hear my voice. She said that the phone went static, and she heard this low-pitched, demonic voice saying, "Get out now or else." I proceeded to tell her what happened and booked a room at the Holiday Inn down the street for the remaining 2 nights. I had someone accompany me to retrieve my bags from the room, and I haven't returned since. I love paranormal stuff, and so does my aunt. She used to be a ghost hunter until she had a terrifying experience that she will not talk about. All I know is that a particularly nasty spirit destroyed her ghost hunting equipment. My very first experience with ghosts was when I was still in a crib, and I could see my late grandfather looking at me. I vividly recall going to my grandma's house a few days later, pointing to a picture and asking where the man was. I said that I had seen him looking in on me right before I went to sleep. It was then they told me I'd never met him since he had passed away before I was born. Yes, I was that kid. After that, however, all I saw were the spirits of my deceased dogs. When we relocated to a new state, I vividly recall finding our pair of Rottweilers on the floor of my newly acquired bedroom. Ever since I've lost my Bichon, I had her for over 10 years, I will occasionally feel something jump on my bed and settle in. At one point, I was able to feel her fur in the location where she used to rest. When we were searching for a house, I once walked into it and walked right back out. I felt the worst energy I've ever felt, at least at that point, in the living room. My realtor arrived shortly after and informed us that the previous owner had died in the house. We drove on to the next house. The most recent thing that happened to me was at the Whaley House in San Diego. It was quite interesting. I honestly wasn't expecting anything to happen, since the people around me weren't taking it seriously, including my husband. To those that think it's false and a tourist gimmick, there's real energy there. But, yes, a tourist gimmick. Visitors will recall that the dog first nuzzled and licked my hand in the dining room. I thought someone was brushing past me, but I was off in a corner kind of away from the group. The next experience was in the theater area. Everyone was taking pictures, and I wandered into the room. Upon entering, I felt as though I had struck a wall. I was freezing and was about to leave when I felt a tug on my arm. Since no one was in the room, I playfully said, "Oh, you," and met the group. Come to find out, the room is usually occupied by someone who is a big ladies' man. His name escapes my memory at the moment. There was also a crushing feeling of sadness in the room to the right of the theater where the baby was lost, if I remember correctly. It is truly worth a visit, not only for its haunted atmosphere, but also for its historical significance. Also in San Diego, the Coronado Hotel is definitely haunted as well. During our visit, we found ourselves lost in a hallway. I wanted to visit the beach area, as there was quite an impressive sandcastle I heard about. I swear, I heard to the left in my ear while trying to figure out where to go. It was a feminine voice, so it wasn't my husband, and we were alone. I explained my experience to the gift shop worker while browsing, and he proceeded to tell me about the woman who committed suicide in the hotel. Apparently, she loved the beach and frequented the hallway we were in.